think Singapore attracts a lot of really interesting, driven, talented people from across the world. I got to meet a lot of interesting people that I feel like I otherwise would not meet if I did not live in Singapore.
Meet Andy, a Cornell and Columbia University graduate currently working as an entrepreneur in the education sector in Singapore. In this video, Andy talks about why he likes Singapore, why he chose Singapore to set up his business, and shares some tips for future expats to this country. I'm David, a lawyer and YouTuber who has lived in Singapore as an expat for the past 5 years. Let's go. You and I both moved to Singapore in 2018, so just over 5 years ago. What have you enjoyed about Singapore, and also what have you found to be things that you don't really like about Singapore?
I've been living here since 2018 and I'm quickly moving on to the 5-year mark. So I think after living here for this period of time, I've been able to really reflect and think about the pros and cons of living in Singapore. I think in terms of pros, the first thing that really comes to mind is the efficiency, the multicultural character of the city, the cleanliness, and I think something that people don't talk about as much is the predictability. The sun comes up at 7 a.m., the sun comes down at 7 p.m., trains come on time every 2 to 5 minutes, and I think having that predictability in your life also helps ease a lot of anxiety. It makes planning very, very simple. So if you were to ask me what was one thing that really stood out, I would say because the city is so well run, it makes it very easy to socialize. Most of my friends live within a 15-minute cab ride away, and I really like the fact that I can really see them very often. It's to the point where it reminds me of my days in university, where I'm constantly surrounded by friends and people I enjoy spending time with. I think there are two drawbacks that come to mind. I think for me, the number one drawback is the climate. I was born and raised in New York, where we have 4 distinct seasons. In Singapore, there's only one season. It is the land of the perpetual summer. And as someone who's not very fond of the heat and the humidity, the climate has been a bit of a challenge. I think the second challenge for me is that I think Singapore attracts a lot of really interesting, driven, talented people from across the world. I got to meet a lot of interesting people that I feel like I otherwise would not meet if I did not live in Singapore. But the problem of having so many talented, driven people from different parts of the world is that they often do not stay for too long. So when I moved here in 2018, I made a lot of really wonderful friends from different parts of the world. And now 5 years later, I think more than half of them have left and have moved on to other parts of the world. So it is a very transient place. And I think that is sort of the thing that I really see as a drawback. It's not so much Singapore's fault, but in an ideal world, I would love to have those people that I met in the first few years, stay here and, just continue building up those friendships.
Yeah, I know that you run your own business here in Singapore, and you've been doing so for the past 5 years. In terms of choosing Singapore, why did you choose Singapore as a place to run your business, to set up your business? How easy has it been to do all that? Is it easy to incorporate a company?
So prior to moving to Singapore in 2018, I actually spent 18 months traveling around the world. I was essentially a digital nomad before this term became very popular during COVID. And during that 18-month stretch, I stayed in various countries in Europe. I was traveling around East Asia, China, Japan, Korea, Southeast Asia, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia. I also made a trip down to Australia, and it was a really wonderful experience, but I also quickly realized that if I wanted to establish a serious business, I needed to set up my business in a hub. And the reason why I chose Singapore is I think Singapore really checks off most of the boxes. It's a great place to live. It's a great place to do business. It's a very business-friendly environment. The main language is English, which makes it easy for an English speaker like myself. And the other reason is the nature of my business. I work in the education space. I have to be in a region that is young and dynamic. And Singapore, being in the heart of Southeast Asia, which is a very young region, really puts me in the best possible place. In terms of setting up the company, it has been a very seamless process. I hired a company that took care of incorporation with visas and anything to do with accounting and other forms of compliance. So for me, it so far has been a very, very seamless, efficient process.
Way back when, after graduation or maybe during your university studies, you thought about a career in the law. Can you explain a little bit how you came about not choosing to go down that path and how you chose to be an entrepreneur, essentially?
So prior to starting my own company, I worked in 2 different legal positions. I worked in the New York County District Attorney's Office, which is a public sector role, and also worked for a corporate law firm in Hong Kong. It was a US law firm that specialized in M&A, capital markets, and I think through those 2 positions, I got a pretty good overview of what being a lawyer would look like. I was a legal assistant in both of those positions. The reason why I decided that law wasn't the right fit was because I realized that I wanted a job where I had more interaction with other people. What I observed in those two positions is as lawyers, a lot of times you're really spent alone drafting documents, reviewing documents, maybe doing the occasional Zoom call or conference call. What I realized was I needed something that had more human-to-human interaction, and also a job that allows me to see something from start to finish. So what I do now is I'm an education consultant, and I help students, mainly from Asia, apply for universities and boarding schools in the US. So I work with them usually for anywhere from 2 to 3 years. And throughout that process, I really get a lot of tangible feedback about their development, about how they're changing and evolving. And the great thing about what I do is that the results are very, very tangible. They either get in or they do not get in. And I think having that tangible feedback and also being able to cultivate relationships with my clients and see them grow and develop has been an amazing experience. And it's also the main reason why I've been doing this for the past 12 years.
So as much as helping students get into their chosen university or university of choice, I know that you're a big believer in also self-development, self-help. Are there any recent books or articles or podcasts that you would recommend?
Yes, it's a great question. The name of the book is The Source. It's a book written by a medical doctor who also has a PhD in neuroscience, and her name is Tara Swart. So I came across her book through a podcast that you recommended. It's the Ali Abdaal podcast, and for those who are interested in the self-development space, I think Ali Abdaal is probably one of the biggest names in the space. So he conducted an interview, I think this was maybe a year or two ago, and basically Dr. Swart is a very interesting, how would I put it? She's a very, very interdisciplinary thinker. So not only is she a medical doctor, she's a neuroscientist, and she also has a strong interest in spirituality. So her book, The Source, is essentially providing a scientific explanation for a lot of spiritual practices like visualization, like the law of attraction, things that we all been hearing a lot about in social media. She provides a very compelling scientific explanation as to why these practices that are often considered to be spiritual, how they actually work in practice from a scientific perspective. I highly recommend it. I think, one good way to get a sense of what she's preaching is to follow some of her podcasts, listen to them, and I listened to a few of them before I decided to buy the book on my Kindle. And so far, I find the book very illuminating, very enlightening, and hopefully I can incorporate some of these practices in my daily life.
So Andy, I know you've lived in various places in Singapore. Could you just take us through where you've lived and where you would recommend for, say, expats thinking about moving to Singapore?
In my 5 years in Singapore, I had the privilege of living in 3 different parts of Singapore. The first place I lived in is near Outram in an area called Spottiswoode Park. That was the first place where I rented a condo, and it remains to be my favorite area, interestingly enough. I stayed there for about 2 years, and then during COVID I decided that I needed a bigger space. So I ended up living in Marina Bay, not too far from Marina Bay Sands. And then now I'm living in the Orchard area in Cane Hill, which is my least favorite area of the 3. In terms of recommendations, I think you can't really go wrong with the central region. In my book, I will define it as anywhere within the Circle Line, just in terms of just ease of transportation and also having a high concentration of restaurants, bars, and interesting, places to visit. I think most of those attractions are more or less located in the central region. However, if I had to choose another place to live, I would highly recommend the East Coast. I did a very brief stint there when I was a visitor here in the East Coast, and I think if I were to move to a new place, I would definitely consider the Joo Chat area, Bedok, Kembangan. I think that stretch has a lot of character. You get a little bit more bang for the buck, and it's really located in the best possible area because it's pretty much between the airport and the downtown area. So you're never really too far from either side.
In terms of making new friends in Singapore, in a new place, a new environment, how have you gone about doing that? And do you have any tips for visitors or potential expats coming to Singapore?
Yes, I think that's one of the main reasons why I love Singapore. It's so easy to meet people from all walks of life, from different parts of the world, in part because I think most of the people here, both foreigners and locals, are very friendly and very open. One of the best ways to meet people, I would say, is to join groups and organizations in areas that you have something in common with. So sports groups, there are a number of apps that you can download if you're looking for a tennis buddy, a squash buddy. I met a lot of great friends through squash, through tennis. Another really great app is called Internations. It's a networking app where you can find a lot of interesting events, activities that bring expats from different parts of the world together. I met the majority of my friends through Internations. And the last source, I would say, is alumni clubs. So I was quite active in 2 different alumni clubs that I'm a member of, and through that I've been able to meet a lot of interesting people living in Singapore. I was able to get a lot of different tips and suggestions on how to make the most out of my time here. So I think Singapore overall has been a wonderful experience, and I think compared to places that I lived in like New York, Hong Kong, San Francisco, I actually find Singapore to be the most livable city and the easiest city to settle in and to integrate.
Thanks very much for watching. To subscribe, click here. To watch further videos like this, click here.